Chuck E. wasn't supposed to be dangerous, but on that Saturday afternoon inside a packed Chuck E. Cheese, the smiling mascot everyone trusted became the center of a crime scene. Parents screamed, children cried, and police swarmed as the oversized mouse head rolled across the arcade floor, revealing the face of a wanted criminal hiding in plain sight. It was the kind of Saturday parents knew well: the sound of arcade machines, the smell of greasy pizza, the squeals of children darting between flashing games. The Chuck E. Cheese on Maplewood Avenue was at full capacity, buzzing with families who wanted nothing more than a simple afternoon of birthday candles, arcade tickets, and prize counters. Balloons brushed the ceiling, tokens clinked against metal trays, and camera phones captured grinning children with their slices of pizza held high. To most, it was ordinary. To those watching closely, something felt off. In the middle of it all, towering above the kids, was the familiar giant mouse mascot. Children followed him in a line, clapping and laughing as he spun in clumsy circles and waved with his oversized gloved hands. The mouse costume looked the same as always: big plastic grin, floppy ears, purple and green outfit. But something about the way he moved caught the eye of a few parents. The gestures seemed too sharp, too restless. Instead of the usual bouncy cheer, the mascot's body twitched with nervous energy, scanning the room rather than delighting the crowd. The workers brushed it off. They had seen all kinds of odd movements from employees inside the heavy costume, who often sweated and stumbled after hours of wearing it. But this wasn't a regular employee. Nobody seemed to notice that the shift schedule didn't have anyone signed up to wear the suit that day. Instead, someone had slipped into the role unnoticed, and for a while, he played it convincingly. As the party games continued, small details began to surface. A mother noticed the mascot pausing a little too long near her purse on the table. A father watched him shuffle close to the counter where staff counted tickets. Another parent thought it strange when the character moved toward the side door instead of the stage, glancing over his shoulder before quickly retreating when staff passed by. These moments were small enough to dismiss, but they stacked up like puzzle pieces waiting to be put together. The children remained oblivious, drawn in by the fantasy of the mouse who handed out high fives and posed for pictures. They cheered when he tossed handfuls of tickets into the air and scrambled on the floor to gather them up. The atmosphere was still cheerful, but beneath the surface, unease crept in. The air felt thicker, the movements less playful. A few parents whispered to each other, exchanging concerned looks. In the security booth, a staff member noticed something strange on the cameras. The mascot was drifting in and out of blind spots, slipping behind machines, crouching low near the token changers. It didn't look like performance, it looked like avoidance. By the time the employee called the manager to confirm who was in the costume, the man inside had already begun moving toward a restricted hallway. Unaware of the growing suspicion, the children shouted and clapped, begging the mouse to stay longer. The costumed figure froze for a moment in their applause, then turned sharply away, his oversized shoes pounding against the tiles. To anyone watching closely, it was no longer entertainment. It was escape. Police in the city had been piecing together a troubling pattern for weeks before that Saturday afternoon. A string of robberies had swept through entertainment venues where families gathered: roller rinks, bowling alleys, indoor playgrounds. Each time, the thief vanished without a trace, leaving investigators puzzled. Witnesses recalled seeing a man in some kind of costume or disguise blending into the chaos, but descriptions were inconsistent. Sometimes it was a clown, other times a party character, and now, according to the latest whispers, a giant mouse. The idea sounded absurd, but the evidence pointed to something far stranger than an ordinary thief. Detectives studied security footage from earlier cases and saw the same peculiar detail. The suspect never entered through main doors like a customer. He always appeared from inside the venue, already disguised, already moving with a strange purpose. That meant he had access before anyone realized, slipping into uniforms or costumes stored in back rooms, disguising himself as part of the staff. It was a perfect cover. In a place filled with noise and excitement, who would question a dancing mascot moving between tables? A confidential tip from an employee at the Maplewood Chuck E. Cheese finally gave police their lead. Someone had been spotted loitering near the dumpsters behind the building earlier in the week, rummaging through bags, peering in windows. The man didn't look like staff, but he returned several times. Detectives suspected he was scouting the location, learning its rhythms, its blind spots, and most importantly, how to get his hands on the mascot uniform. They knew if he struck again, it would be there. On the morning of the birthday party, plainclothes officers were already nearby, parked in unmarked cars around the strip mall. They blended in like parents waiting for their kids, but their eyes never strayed far from the entrance. Inside, others had slipped in among the crowd, pretending to play games or order food. They were ready to catch the suspect if he showed up, though none of them could have predicted just how surreal the moment would become. As the day wore on, the officers realized their instincts were right. The mascot wasn't on the schedule. The employee who was supposed to wear the costume had called out sick that week, and no replacement had been assigned. Yet here was the giant mouse, dancing awkwardly through the arcade, pretending to be the star of the show. Parents clapped along without realizing that the person behind the mask wasn't an entertainer at all, but the same criminal police had been tracking. Every move he made only confirmed their suspicions. He lingered near exits, hovered by the counter where money was stored, and slipped out of view whenever cameras could have caught him clearly. He was rehearsing his escape, waiting for the perfect time to strike. Officers exchanged silent signals, tightening their formation. They didn't want to scare the families, but the moment of confrontation was approaching. What none of them knew was that the suspect had already hidden something beneath the costume, and when the time came, his desperate attempt to flee would send the entire arcade spiraling into chaos. The crowd inside the arcade was still buzzing with joy, but the mood had shifted in ways most didn't notice. Parents focused on their children winning stuffed animals. Staff hurried to serve pizzas and refill sodas, and kids raced from one flashing game to the next. Hidden in the noise, officers watched carefully, their eyes trained on the oversized mouse weaving through the chaos. They didn't yet know how far the suspect was willing to go, only that his movements were growing more urgent. The man in the costume seemed restless. He no longer played to the children's laughter with exaggerated gestures. Instead, he walked briskly, shoulders tense beneath the padded suit, hands twitching in oversized gloves. He glanced toward the stage, then the hallway that led to the manager's office, then back to the crowd. Each step carried the weight of someone preparing to make a move. Parents noticed subtle oddities but brushed them off as clumsy theatrics. After all, a mascot was supposed to look awkward. What they couldn't see was the determination in his hidden face, his jaw clenched tightly as he inched closer to the restricted area. An officer standing near the skee-ball lanes spotted the moment everything changed. The mascot pushed past a group of children too quickly, nearly knocking one over, before turning down a corridor marked "Employees Only." It wasn't a path for show. It led directly to where the day's cash was stored before being collected. The officer reached for his radio, signaling others to converge. They moved slowly, blending into the crowd, waiting for the right moment to block the suspect's escape. Inside the costume, the man's plan was unraveling. He had expected the same ease he found in other venues. No one paying attention, staff too distracted to notice. But something about the tension in the air made him speed up. He pulled a small bag from beneath the costume and tucked it under one arm. The bulge distorted the mouse's friendly shape, making the character look uneven, though children still laughed, thinking it part of the act. The suspect picked up his pace, the giant shoes thudding louder on the tiles, drawing suspicious glances. As he reached the hallway, a figure stepped into his path. It wasn't a staff member, but one of the undercover officers, pretending to examine a vending machine. The suspect froze for a split second, then jerked backward, almost tripping over his own costume feet. The hesitation was enough to confirm everything. Officers across the arcade began shifting, closing in without sirens, without announcements, just quiet precision. But the suspect wasn't ready to give in. He turned sharply, storming back into the main arcade, weaving through the tables where parents sat with birthday cakes. Chairs clattered to the floor as his oversized body knocked them aside. A balloon popped loudly, startling children who squealed with confusion. To them, the mouse was no longer entertaining. It was frightening. The arcade's music and game noises suddenly seemed deafening as families realized something was happening. A wave of unease rippled across the room. Parents pulled their children close, watching in disbelief as the cheerful mascot bolted toward the exit doors, clutching his bag tightly. Officers followed, accelerating their pace. The chase was no longer hidden. It was about to explode into a spectacle no one would ever forget. The moment the chase erupted, the arcade transformed from a place of fun into a scene of panic. The man in the costume sprinted as best he could, the oversized mouse head wobbling and tilting dangerously while his giant shoes slapped the floor. Kids who had been clapping seconds earlier now screamed in fear, their games abandoned mid-play as tokens rolled across the ground. Parents shouted frantically, scooping their children into their arms, pulling them toward safety as the enormous mascot crashed through tables and knocked pizza trays to the ground. Officers shouted for everyone to move aside, their voices struggling to cut through the blaring music and chiming machines. The suspect pushed forward, the bag clutched tight to his chest, sweat soaking the inside of the costume. His heavy breaths echoed behind the smiling plastic mask. He barreled past the prize counter, scattering small toys across the floor, before colliding with a balloon stand that burst into a tangle of strings and deflated rubber. The sight was surreal, a beloved children's character thrashing wildly while the room erupted in chaos. Children clung to their parents, some crying hysterically, others frozen in shock as their favorite mascot became something monstrous. A few were still too young to understand, their laughter clashing against the terror around them. To them, it looked like part of the entertainment, a strange performance they couldn't yet interpret. Parents, however, saw the reality. This was no act. This was a criminal fight unfolding in the middle of a birthday party. The first officer reached him near the skee-ball machines, lunging to grab the costume's oversized arm. The suspect jerked violently, swinging the padded limb with unexpected force, knocking the officer sideways into a row of flashing arcade cabinets. Lights flickered as a game toppled, the sound of digital explosions adding to the bedlam. The man staggered but did not stop, dragging his padded feet toward the main exit, determined to escape. Two more officers closed in from the side. One lunged for the mascot's torso, grabbing fabric, while the other aimed for the bulging bag. The suspect fought back with raw desperation, twisting and flailing. Children shrieked as the giant mouse toppled onto a nearby table, crushing paper plates, spilling soda across the floor. The mascot's smiling head tilted back, wobbling until finally, with one violent pull from an officer, it rolled across the tiles like a ball. Gasps filled the air as the man's face was revealed, sweaty, furious, and unmistakably human. The illusion shattered instantly. No longer a playful figure, he was just a man in a stolen suit, and now he was cornered. Still, he resisted. Officers pressed him down onto the sticky floor, their radios crackling as backup stormed through the front doors. Children screamed louder, some covering their eyes. Others pointing in confusion as their beloved character writhed beneath police. Sirens wailed outside, echoing through the glass, sealing the sense that this was no performance, but a real arrest. At last, the struggle ended. Handcuffs snapped shut, and the suspect lay pinned, gasping for air, surrounded by spilled pizza, scattered tokens, and the piercing cries of children whose safe celebration had been torn apart. The chaos faded slowly into silence, broken only by the sobs of families staring at the unimaginable. The image of the mascot being dragged away in cuffs spread through the building like a shockwave. Parents comforted crying children, trying to explain what they themselves could hardly believe. The arcade floor was littered with overturned chairs, soggy pizza slices, and forgotten tokens glinting under the flashing neon lights. A few families rushed out the doors into the parking lot, unwilling to stay another second. Others stood frozen, staring at the surreal sight of a beloved character turned criminal. For the children, the memory would take root like a nightmare. The day the mouse stopped smiling and was wrestled to the ground by police. News vans arrived within minutes, alerted by frantic calls and scanner chatter. Reporters pressed against the glass windows, cameras catching the scene as officers led the suspect outside. The costume's oversized shoes flopped against the pavement as he stumbled, still half dressed in the colorful fabric. The mouse head, once a symbol of laughter, sat abandoned on the arcade floor, its grin forever frozen as a reminder of the deception. Parents shielded their children's eyes from the sight, but the flashing cameras ensured it would soon be broadcast everywhere. Investigators later revealed the full plan. Hidden inside the bag he carried was a bundle of stolen items, wallets lifted from distracted parents, purses emptied of cash, and tools meant to pry open the safe in the manager's office. The suspect had mapped the building for weeks, slipping in unnoticed, pretending to be staff. His earlier crimes had followed the same pattern. But this time his arrogance led him into the center of a crowded room, believing no one would dare question a mascot adored by children. What he hadn't counted on was the quiet presence of undercover officers waiting for him to make his move. The arrest didn't just end a string of thefts. It shattered the sense of safety families had in places meant for joy. Parents admitted later they struggled to return. The thought of a criminal hiding in costume where their kids played was too much to forget. Some children cried at the mere mention of the character, their innocent trust broken in a single afternoon. Even weeks after reopening, the arcade felt quieter, less carefree, as if the memory clung to its walls. The suspect himself became a notorious figure. The footage of him being unmasked was replayed endlessly on television and online, sparking both outrage and disbelief. Commentators called it one of the strangest takedowns in recent memory, a bizarre intersection of childhood fantasy and real-world crime. In interviews, police admitted it was among the most unsettling arrests they had ever made, not because of the danger alone, but because of the setting. The sound of children's screams colliding with flashing lights and cartoon music. Time moved on, but the story lingered. Parents still told it in hushed tones, and children who had been there remembered every detail. What was meant to be a day of cake, laughter, and prizes became a story etched permanently in the town's history. The day the smiling mascot was revealed not as a friend, but as a thief hiding in plain sight.